9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. As you know, every week at this time we sit down, we talk about what's going on in the political scene in Washington and America, and there is obviously much to discuss. Fortunately, we've got three of the very, very best people that we can think of to discuss it, including Tom Bonier, who's senior advisor at Target Smart. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm great.
And our friends, Tara McGowan of Courier Newsrooms. How are you doing, Tara?
Doing well, David. How are you?
Excellent. And of course, Mr. Hopium, Simon Rosenberg himself. How are you doing, Simon?
Always good when I'm with you, David.
Oh my gosh, that feels so good. I suppose all of us are feeling fairly good this week. You know, the debate could have been an ordeal. As it was, most of the people I know who watched it told me later they couldn't fall asleep. They were so excited after the debate by the performance of Kamala Harris, and not to mention the underperformance of Donald Trump. I want to get into concrete measures of where we are in this election cycle as our main topic. But before I do, I would be remiss if I didn't go to each of you and get a brief reaction to the debate itself. Let me turn first to you, Tara.
Thank you, David. I think I'm feeling how a lot of folks in the pro-democracy movement are feeling. The vice president understood the assignment. She gave us the debate performance we had all been wanting and eager for a long time. I think that she very brilliantly and eloquently was able to weave some of her personal story and background that a lot of Americans still might not know with her plans to bring us into a better path on this country when it comes to the economy, and showed her absolute most effective, fierce advocacy for reproductive rights and freedom in a way that I really do believe no one can like a woman who understands the threats of the federal abortion ban and the provisions within Project 2025, and was also able to bait the shit out of Donald Trump incredibly effectively. It was a masterclass performance. It checked every box that we needed, both to elevate her and to diminish him on that stage.
Yeah, Simon, Tara just did a great summary of it, but she also did one of the things that really irritates me in some of the summaries, which is she talked about how she baited Donald Trump. A lot of people have over-focused on that, as if how Donald Trump was treated was the centerpiece of this debate. I know Tara wasn't doing that. I'm just picking up on it, because what I really think deserves credit is her performance, and she set the narrative, and the race is about her, and we are turning the page from him, and it wasn't a reactive performance in my view. Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, even starting from the very open, and I was there to make sure that I didn't miss the opening, because the opening can always be telling. And when she walked across the room, right, I mean, she spooked him. He got rattled. I mean, you could tell that he wasn't sure what to do. She said her name. He kind of grunted in a very kind of Trumpian way. And, she got in his face right away. Like, she let him know that she was coming for him. And it was amazing. And one of the things that, and I agree with everything Tara said, I as I reflect back over the last couple of days, is just how much what we're seeing out of this remarkable performance from Kamala Harris, right? Just now running what will be an historic campaign, and 18 months of work in 6 weeks, and all the things that they're doing without making any major mistakes. It's incredible. But she came out of that very first event at the headquarters, and she said, I've been a vice president, you know me as a senator, but before then I was a prosecutor, and I was a district attorney, and I was an attorney general. And I put people like Donald Trump away. And that was how she introduced herself to all of us in this new moment. And I think it's the explanation for what we're seeing, which is that she doesn't believe Donald Trump has superpowers. She doesn't believe that this is a guy to be feared. He's one of these assholes that she put in jail, and she knows him, and she's not intimidated by him. In fact, she's motivated to make him go away. And it is an explanation to me for both the strength of her offense at the debate, but also the way that she felt comfortable in the way she engaged him and prodded him, poked him, humiliated him, attacked him, whatever the words you want to use, is that she took this big baby man and made him really small and pathetic and desperate and ridiculous. And it was incredible. And it's what you have to do in a trial, right? You have to make the defendant, into something that's not strong and powerful, but to something that's small and weak and pathetic. And I think that it helps me understand why she's been better at explaining to all of us the dangers of Trump than any other Democrat in the last 9 years. And I think it's a central reason why she's been so successful, because she's making herself bigger and stronger than him, which was necessary for her to be able to do to win this election.
Yeah, what was your take, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, to Simon's point, I can't recall seeing a debate where one candidate was just more in control of the entire debate from beginning to end, which was just remarkable. How comfortable she was, how amused she was. We've seen all sorts of different tactics debating Donald Trump that generally haven't worked in the past, generally end with the Democratic candidate feeling exasperated. And to see the control that she exercised over him was incredible. And to Tara's point, to me, that answer on abortion rights was so incredibly powerful. And I think what so many Americans have been waiting to see, someone just to be able to confront him face to face on what he did in the impact of it, because he's been trying to run from it. He's been trying to hide from it. And to see her confront him so effectively was incredible.
Yeah, Tara, I didn't mean to pick on what you said before, but I was struck by the fact that taken on any metric, it was probably the best performance I've ever seen in a presidential debate. I mean, I don't think that's hyperbole. And picking up on Tom's point, for example, on that answer on uh, reproductive rights, or on the answers on America's standing on the world, where she turned to Trump and said what a disgrace he was, or in any of the other answers, she was extraordinarily eloquent. She was extraordinarily well briefed. She brought to bear in every answer substance as well as style. Um, and we've been having conversations like this literally for years here. And I think throughout all of those conversations, I can't speak for Tom because he hasn't been in all of them, but I think we've all thought Kamala Harris is a remarkable, underestimated politician. And, you know, now the world is seeing this. And for those of us who've had a lot of faith in her for a long time, the question is, why is she underestimated? How did how did we get to this point, Tara?
Why is any woman underestimated? David, who wants to take this one out of the three of you? No, it really is a hugely undercovered, I think, and underspoken about part of Kamala's story, right? I mean, it's not a secret in Washington, at least, that she had a lot of frenemies, or let's say just not fans, in the Biden administration and in the White House. No one really knows what are the rumors, what's actually true, but we do know that there was not a closeness necessarily between President Biden's team and hers. She has had staff turnover. She hasn't had the best reputation in terms of management in past campaigns. She ended up taking herself out of the running right in the primary race. There are some facts here that build this narrative in this case, that she wasn't going to be up to the job. But literally from the moment of her rebuttal that she gave on cable, on pretty much every cable news network after President Biden's disastrous debate, she has risen to the moment and the occasion. And my personal theory, because I cannot speak for her, I have no idea how she would describe this at all, or what she would own up to, or be willing to talk about at any point in time about what she's been through, was that she was finally given the job, right? She was finally told, we need you. Like, right, as opposed to, we actually need you here in this corner, or we need you to just be, okay with everything we're doing, or just be the great, number two, the cheerleader for the administration and the policies. But to be like, you need to be you, and you need to take this over because we have a crisis moment. She rose to that occasion, and she has never stepped away from it since that moment. And it should no longer surprise us, because that was always who she was and what she was capable of. And we know that when we look back at her career, how did she become the Attorney General of California, right? And I'm so just grateful and delighted that the American people are seeing her in her absolute element and in her power. She has stepped into her power. This is what it looks like when someone steps into their power. And women have been underestimated in every industry for as long as time. So those women listening know this. I'm sure that they are agreeing. I can only speak for myself in this too, that being underestimated professionally is one of the greatest fuels to the fire of ambition and hard work. And I think it's also really, really, really interesting and spot on that the message that she went to the watch party after the debate to her supporters, her volunteers, her campaign staff is hard work is good work. And she puts in the work. And, that's very, very clear from her debate performance, but also every single thing she has showed up for as the nominee who did not ask for this role, but has taken it and really taken it to a new level.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, and I think one of the reasons that she was put in the corner is because she is a superior politician, and people
And that's
feared
threatening. That is threatening.
feared her power, and that happens with strong women. Simon and I both fear your power, Tara, on a regular basis. Simon, let me ask you a question, and sort of shift the conversation into the central area that I wanted to talk about. And I read Hopium Chronicles. Everybody should read Hopium Chronicles. I follow the statements that all you guys make in the press, and obviously we had a series of conversations about red waves and whatnot in 2020, and there were a lot of bad polls. There was a lot of bad analysis. And so right now we have the most important election in American history. And Americans are looking and they're going, well, what do I trust? I mean, it looks like Kamala Harris just trounced this guy. Now, the other guy shouldn't even be in this race. And people keep telling me this is super close. And there are polls that show Trump a little ahead. And, I think there are tiers of qualities of information. That's one of the things that I've learned from you and from Tom and from Tara over time. Because some of the polls are biased. They're purpose polls that are underwritten for a reason, and some of the polls focus on the wrong audience, registered voters as opposed to likely voters, and some of the polls use the wrong technology. They go to cell phones and people don't answer their cell phone, and some of the data that you got is just ridiculous. I mean, for some reason, sorry for the long preamble, but I'll get
It's
to the
okay.
point
It's
here.
been fun,
But
David. It's been fun.
good, but some, one of the things that's become popular is like, these Nate Silver polymarket things where people are like, oh, 63% of the American people think this is going to come out this way, which is complete bullshit. I mean, there's nothing in this. It's not even an online marketplace of any sort. And then there's some stuff
There's more.
that is there's some stuff that's that's meaningful. We've talked about registration, money, volunteers. Early voting will be one that we're going to see.
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to talk to all of you about, beginning with you, is where do we look to find data that we can trust?
I'm going to leave it to Tom to talk about the way that we expanded the data set that we were looking at in 2022 and how it applies to 2024. I'm going to, in the division of labor here, because you asked a lot of questions, I'm going to let Tom take that part. And all that I'll say about polling, because polling is just one bit of the data that, people in politics use. I mean, I tell the story that when I had lunch with Julie Mers, who was the head of the DCCC and running all the House races, and we went over all the top races. We didn't even talk about polling because all the elections were close, right? They were even basically. We spent all the time talking about all these other things, which Tom's going to get into in a second. But I think in terms of, yeah, look, it's a mess. This is a mess. I mean, it's not just that you've got quality polling and crappy polling and partisan polling but you've now got this emergence of the betting markets, which is this whole, and prediction markets, which is this whole, even darker black box than, the polling. You've got, Nate Silver out there, who I think is just a negative attention machine. He's like a mini Elon Musk. He just wants everyone to hate him, and it makes him happy because he just wants to, be in the conversation and and be provocative because he gets clicks, right? I mean, there's a huge amount of this that's about getting clicks and for people, and that it doesn't matter about the integrity of the data. It matters about the number of clicks you get. And so the more provocative you get. And also there's just a basic truth about our media system, which is that the Republican ecosystem is more networked and amplified than ours is. So when, there's a positive poll for Trump, it just gets more clicks than a positive poll for Harris. It's just a reality. And so the news organizations have incredible incentive to sort of, shape things that are a little bit more Republican. And so what I would say is this is what I try to do at Hopium and what Tom and I have done and a handful of us is that we've tried to cut through all of that and say, these are the broad trend lines we're seeing. This is how as somebody who's been doing this and touching this kind of data for decades, this is how I wade through all the crap and come out the other side and tell you what I see. And what I see today, just using polling as the main metric, is that we're ahead by 2 to 3 points nationally. We are ahead by 2 to 3 points in what's called the congressional generic, which is, and by the way, all the data is basically telling the same story. There's virtually no outliers in polling right now, which is unusual, but it's where we are, which is why you can be certain about what I'm saying. And then we also are in the battleground states, we're ahead. I mean, we're not at 270. It's not done deal, but we're in better shape than they are. And we also have huge financial and enthusiasm and volunteer advantages over the Republicans. And so our basic theory of the case is that we're a little bit ahead. We've got momentum coming out of the debate, and we have a far greater capacity to close strong than they do. And that when you push all that forward, it's much more likely that we win than them. And I'll turn it to Tom, if you don't mind for me to do the handoff, David, to turn it to Tom to talk about these measures of intensity that I think are going to become a much more important part of our understanding of the election in the coming weeks.
So the boss says,
There's a new producer. Look, I love talking about voter registration trends, so I'll take the opportunity. To Simon's point, the polls are going to tell us that the race is close. And as Simon says, from the perspective of the poll averages, we're likely leading by a little bit. And so the big question becomes, it's trite, but what is turnout going to look like? That's always the question, but I think it's even more important this time around. We have to keep in mind, and I'll just repeat this ad nauseum because I see people making this mistake on a daily basis. The polls don't tell us who is going to vote. The polls are based on the pollster's assumption of who is going to vote. New York Times poll that everyone was freaking out about a few days ago that showed a 1-point race said the electorate is going to be +3 Republican, right? I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying we can add context. And to your point, David, about the type of analysis that Simon and I and others have been doing, especially going back to 2022. And I think why we all had that confidence to go in and say this isn't going to be a red wave election is relying on this additional data to say, okay, well, what do we think turnout is going to look like? What do these indicators look like? Voter registration was incredibly helpful in 2022 because we saw after Dobbs that surge in registration, especially among women, younger voters, and voters of color, especially in the states where we ended up overperforming, places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada. So we know that for the first half of this year, voter registration didn't look great for Democrats. We were seeing an underperformance. We were seeing a lack of intensity and enthusiasm among the Democratic base. What our team did is we looked at immediately after July 21, after President Biden withdrew from the race and endorsed Vice President Harris, just to see, well, what's that impact? Just like we did 2 years ago, right after June 24th and the Dobbs decision, to see who's registering to vote. Because that's much more important than, as you say, these sort of Nate Silver market, the betting market analysis. This is people actually going out and saying, I need to make sure that I'm eligible to vote in this election. And what we saw was a complete turnaround. And I can't emphasize this strongly enough. I was amazed by what we saw after Dobbs. Seeing in places like Kansas, 40-point gender gaps in registration. Women under the age of 25 voting at a higher rate than all men in an August primary election in Kansas. What we've seen in the period immediately following the candidate change has, in almost every state, exceeded the numbers we saw post-Dobbs. And in terms of a comparison to 4 years earlier, to that same point in the 2020 cycle, we're seeing, in a lot of cases, a tripling, if not more, of registration rates among young women of color, especially young Black women, young Hispanic women, broadly young voters overall, women overall. It's the same groups, right? It's the same groups that fueled the Democratic overperformance in 2022 are even more intense right now in this election. And so I think that's huge. The last point I'll add, if I can throw in one sort of breaking news number, is, just like everyone else, we watch the debate, we see the excitement and enthusiasm, and then we wonder, are we in our own echo chamber here? Like, is this really resonating elsewhere the way that we feel like it is? And so we look for numbers. That's why I looked at those registration numbers when people were calling Vice President Harris's campaign launch a sugar high, as if it's something that would just go away. So our team has a database, basically voter registration systems hit against our voter file to check people who want to register to vote. We work with groups like vote.org and others. And we've got a really cool chart on this on Twitter. It actually shows during the debate, we saw a quadrupling of voter registration checks on our system. And then when Taylor Swift posted what she posted on Instagram and encouraging people to register to vote, it went up even higher. So that intensity and enthusiasm, excitement, maybe a sugar high in some ways is apt, but that sugar high is producing measurable market gains. What we know is if you register to vote in the lead up to election, you have an 85% probability of voting in that election. So these are real voters who are likely to vote in this election, who frankly weren't engaged before. And to the extent that President Biden was trailing in the polls back in July, these were the voters who we needed back.
The Taylor Swift 24-hour number was something like 420,000 new people who went to voter registration site direct from her recommendation. So that seems to me to be pretty substantial. To give you a sense to those listening of what hopeless nerds these three are, when Tom was sitting here talking about voter registration, and for those of you who couldn't see it, Tara started dancing. I mean, she started snapping her fingers and dancing around to Tom's voter registration data, which is a new form of music. Maybe we would call it hope hop. But she
That was good, David. Yeah, David, what'd you have for lunch today?
He had some hope.
That hope the Hopium contact
Yeah.
high that listening to you. But Tara, I just wanted to make sure they all saw that what was going with that, and I'd like you to answer the same question. But you know, when you do, in addition to the registration numbers, it seems to me that numbers that you know a lot about, like the volunteering numbers and the donation numbers, which have also been off the charts, also seem like hard signs, not just of enthusiasm, but of the kind of action that translates into votes. But what's your take, Tara?
You want me to answer on volunteer numbers? I'm going to give
Well,
those.
just your reaction. I mean, I'm asking
So
the same question
my
I'm asking them.
Yeah, no. Well, so Tom said how surprised, and I know happily so, he was, though, after Dobbs to see the numbers of women in especially red states. I was not surprised at all. When you come at our bodies, we're gonna show up, and we know that women have really carried the elections and the victories for Democrats long before Dobbs, but most especially since Dobbs. And we're going to see that again, and we're going to see it for a very long time to come, because this is going to have a generational effect with new younger generations coming up for the first time in many, many decades in a number of states in this country who do not have rights to their bodily autonomy. And that is what they know, and they are fired up and ready to fight for that and ready to ensure that we are never in this position again. Actually, just last night, I had the great privilege of interviewing Amanda Zarowski, who is the woman from Texas, who was the lead plaintiff in the case against the state of Texas, who nearly died from not being given a life-saving abortion in that state. She was the very first case. She needed a life-saving abortion for the child that she lost late in her pregnancy, and was notified about that just a few days after the state passed the full abortion ban in the state. Stories like hers are the stories that are moving across this country, because unfortunately we are in a position where we have women dying and who are facing these things, and we know what is at stake here. And I think especially the younger generations of women and women of color coming up, because women of color have even higher maternal mortality rates and worse experiences in our healthcare system as it is, never mind when reproductive healthcare is denied them. So these numbers are directly related to what we know to be at stake for our livelihood. And so it is, I was dancing in validation and also excitement, because I know that women are not only going to win us this election, but they're also going to be the ones in control, in large part, when we do win this election. And it is about damn time. So that was the enthusiasm pouring out of my snaps.
Well, I'm dancing right along with you on that point. Simon, let's see, what do we have here? We've got about 10, 11 minutes to go. We're how many days away from early voting?
Next Friday. So, excuse me, depending on when you're listening, it's really soon, next week.
It's a week, and that, of course, is another sign. As you are looking at it, is that the next big sign of whether the apparent enthusiasm is going to translate itself into an edge at the polls?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two things. I think one is polling itself. I mean, I think we actually have now gotten two polls today, Morning Consult and Ipsos Reuters, where Harris has gained a point or two in each of them from where they were last time. The Morning Consult poll had her at +5. Their poll that they released on Monday was +3, so it was a 2-point gain. And I think it's reasonable to assume she picks up a point or two in national polling, given the coverage and given just the smackdown that happened in the debate. And then, yeah, we have 46 days of voting coming. It's a voting season now. As Tom always likes to say, Election Day is now the last day of voting. It's not the most important day of voting. I think the most important day of voting now is actually the first 2 or 3 days of these early vote windows in all the states. I think we We won the election in 2022 in the early vote, and we're going to win this one too in the early vote. And I think for your listeners, one thing that's very important to realize is that if one of the ways that you can help Kamala Harris and the Democrats is by voting early, by voting on day one or as early as you can. Because the way this works is that the campaign every night gets a list of everybody who voted. And if you vote early, they take you off the list. And the faster that we can get what are called prime Democrats, people that vote all the time, to go vote, the faster the campaign can move on to what are called lower propensity voters or people who are episodic voters. And the faster we can move on to those voters and start talking to them and touching them, it makes it far more likely that we grow our turnout, and it makes it far more likely that we win. So by early voting or voting on day one, you're actually helping Democrats win elections. It's another step we can take. And if you're wondering why you didn't know that, it's because this whole early voting system that we have is very new. This is a new thing. In some states, it's brand new. And so this is the first election cycle where the national party, because the last election was during COVID and it was crazy, right? Where we have the ability to drive, we have unprecedented tools now to drive the early vote and to win the election in October and not in November. I mean, the way to think about it is, we want to go into halftime ahead. If it's a football game, we want to go into halftime ahead by 2 touchdowns. So it gets very hard for the other team to catch up. Well, we have the ability to do that if we all put our heads down and we all vote early. And we also make sure that the volunteerism that we're doing is now and over the next few weeks. And you're not thinking, well, I'll start working for Kamala Harris at the end of October. We need you now. You need to volunteer right now. I was just on a call with people who are calling in to North Carolina, and I am hearing from people who phone bank and canvass regularly, who do this every 2 years, that the responses on the phones and the doors are unlike anything they've ever heard. The receptivity, the excitement, the enthusiasm. If you want to go help Kamala Harris, be talking to voters right now, because people are really open to us. And when we talk to voters, we can turn them from potential voters, potential supporters into voters. And that's how we win. So this is a very exciting time for us, this early vote period. We have unprecedented tools to drive for a party that has more episodic and new voters than the other party. We have unprecedented tools to drive a strong, electoral performance than we've ever had before, if we use them and if everybody goes out and busts their ass.
You have confidence in those tools, Tom? Do you have confidence that the national party and the state parties are calling people up or emailing people or texting people or saying early voting starts in X days, get out, here's how you do it, and here are the obstacles the Republicans are going to put up, here's how to make sure you're registered, here's how to overcome being turned away this way or that way? I mean, is the machine in place to do what Simon's talking about?
It is. I have the strongest confidence in what they've built under Jamie Harrison's leadership at the DNC. They've built this tech data team, and I have a front row seat to this because we work with them closely. I've actually worked with DNC data and tech departments going back to the mid '90s. Believe it or not, I know no one will believe that. I'm old enough, but
That was back when Simon was there with an abacus.
that's right. That's exactly right.
I was in middle school, just for the
All right, I'm done.
Yeah,
You can just end it. That's a
I
wrap.
don't hear from her anymore. Go on.
But that's just a big downer. And so
Just unnecessary.
it is. It's gratuitous. So what we've seen, what they've built is the ability, as Simon said, to get these real-time updates. And we're downstream of it. A lot of the data, I'll encourage people. Simon made great use of this in 2022 cycle. Our Target Early site, we'll launch it. We'll be sure to share it with your listeners. It's publicly available, but it's downstream of all these tools and tech and data that the DNC and state party teams have built. So in a lot of these states, they're actually getting 2 updates a day. So it's as close to real time as you can get. And so they are ready. When you look at the great successes they had in 2000 during the pandemic, as Simon said, what a great triumph. Over 100 million Americans voted before Election Day. It's going to be a smaller share this time around because some states have taken a step back. Places like Georgia in 2020 were mailing everyone a ballot. They're not going to do that this time. And there are a lot of people who, frankly, did it out of necessity because of their personal safety who will go back to voting on Election Day. But to Simon's point, I encourage Democrats, if you can, go out and vote as soon as you can. And while, as you said, early voting starts in a week, there's actually a very small number of ballots that have already been cast in this election. Just to emphasize how much we are in the midst of this now. Some states that do vote by mail, they've already mailed out a number of ballots, and some of them have been returned. So I'm not going to start to try to analyze those numbers. I've got a whole thing on how there's some bad analysis out there already on vote by mail requests. We have to remember Democrats overwhelmingly won vote by mail. In Pennsylvania, almost 75% of mail ballots were cast by Democrats, or Joe Biden won almost 75% of those ballots. The ratio won't be as big this time around because Republicans are actually investing in it. And again, a lot of those Democrats will go back to election day voting. But yeah, to your question, David, I have complete faith in the operation that's been built on the Democratic side around early voting.
So, Tara, are you old enough to vote in this election?
I am. I'm sorry. That was gratuitous. But when you guys all pile on where you were in the mid 90s, I actually didn't even do the math right. I was in elementary school. I am old enough.
I don't think we're going to underestimate you anymore, Tara.
You don't need to release this.
Yeah.
It's fine.
No more underestimating Tara.
Tom, you look great. I thought we were the same age. So. Doing great.
Tom looks great.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Tara.
You all look great. I'm just saying.
Simon and I are so grateful. Riley, I hear technical problems make it into the final podcast. It does bring up the question, though, which is younger voters. When I look at this thing, I see women of color, younger voters as pillars. Tara, is that right?
Yes, and I will say younger voters and my younger staffers who work for me all make me feel very, very old because.
Well, I'm glad. Thank God for small folks.
I am not that young. Young people are absolutely critical in this election, both whether they vote or whether they don't. Right, that plays a role, and that's the biggest need really in terms of encouraging turnout, and also what we don't know, right? Young people have voted at a higher propensity than historically since after 2016 and every election since. Tom is nodding if you can't see him to that. And so I expect that will happen again. But it is a little difficult. Gen Z also over-index as independents. They do not trust the political system. They do not trust either party by and large, but they do share and hold popular positions on issues like abortion and climate change and LGBTQ plus rights, which are called progressive by the media often, but are just popular. They are shared by the majority of people. And so it's going to be interesting to see if we can actually turn them out. I have high confidence that younger women will be a massive and decisive voting bloc in this country, and that under 40-year-olds who make up the largest swath of the electorate for the first time ever, the eligible voting electorate, it's going to be decisive whether we can get the majority of those able and willing to vote out.
That's a super useful insight. All of these have been super useful insights. Folks listening to this, I think we're entering the point in this race where the insights of people like Simon and Tara and Tom become the most high value added. As we get, in the preliminaries, there's less data. As we go into the period where there's early voting, there's more and more of this kind of data that you don't hear talked about elsewhere. And I certainly recall from interim elections and from the elections in 2022, and when we were all, the four of us were having these conversations, that the message and the conclusions we were drawing, that you guys were drawing, was different from that you were hearing in the rest of the media. Now, I think they've been educated a bit. I hope that seeps out. But I encourage everybody who's listening to follow Tom, follow Simon, follow Tara, follow the work they're doing together. Our conversations have become so good. Simon and Tara have their own sort of side gig with each other. It's like, hey, this could be even better if David weren't there.
Go to Courier Newsroom, watch Closing Look, David, look what you created.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I have to see
Exactly.
Simon every day,
Well, look,
which is
normally, those are the kind of things that make people competitive in the media. Not me. We're all in this together. This is, a shared enterprise. Uh, I encourage everybody to go watch that, track these things, track the stuff Tom's putting out, and we'll have you guys back like real super soon because we've got like 6 weeks or something like that, and it's crazy, and so we've got to have a bunch more conversations with some of this new data. But for now, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody. Go get them. We'll be back again soon. Bye bye.